So happy to have with us the current sheriff of Pima County, Mark Napier. And we are looking to go in today and just have, again, like I said, some brave conversations, even some tough conversations. Even if it's tough, sometimes it's okay. Because instead of just having monologue and having dialogue, healthy dialogue, I believe we can get somewhere. And so you're tuning in to Higher Ground with Dr. Holt, and I'm so happy that you guys are tuning in with us and being with us on today. Um, we know that our nation has been on fire with so much racial tension, and so because of the injustices and inequality in our communities, and particularly our communities of color, and particularly African American communities. And rightfully so. Our nation has been outraged for some of the things that's been taking place, and we've seen time in and time out of our many of our communities have been outraged and angry because of the fact that what we've seen with police brutality and even that African American men and women unarmed being killed at the hands of our law enforcement. And so it's one thing to be angry, but it's another to shift your anger into an agenda for change. And that's what I strongly advocate for, is that we have to look at creating cultural shifts. We have to look at shifting policy and new legislation, really getting some systemic change for certain policies and structures that's been in place for so many years that has impacted the communities of color and minorities in this country. Again, you listen to Dr. Higher Ground with Dr. Holt, and this is a show that addresses trauma, mental health, and social justice issues. And most definitely, when we talk about social justice, we're talking about criminal justice reform. If we've ever needed reform, we sure do need reform right now. And the question is, we've been using it as a buzzword, but really, what does reform look like? And when you look at the different sides of the aisles, there's many different ideas, many different agendas, and different even outcomes when we look at reform. But reform is a must. Reform needs to take place. And many of you guys hear me most of the time lately into the last several weeks, spending a lot of time on trauma. I think this is still appropriate because of the fact that I believe that what we are experiencing in our country is traumatizing. It was traumatizing to see George Floyd life be taken away from him. And we have to look at that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. 46 seconds when you don't have air is a very long time. So add 8 minutes to 46 seconds, and you can imagine how grueling, how atrocious it was, and how traumatizing it was for us to see that a grown man, will call out for his mama in the face of death. I couldn't imagine what was George Floyd's mindset that when he went to that store that day, not knowing that he was not going to come back home forever. And not just with Mr. Floyd. We have the Breonna Taylors. We have Ahmaud Arbors. We have Eric Garner, the first one that came out and said, "I cannot breathe." And that was a tragic death, again, at the hands of law enforcement. We see time in and time out that we see police brutality. Now, let me say this as a disclaimer, because I just want people to know that I'm no fool and not stupid. When I talk about this is not talking about the entire law enforcement community. And it's crazy I have to keep saying that because people try to make it seem like you're talking about the entire police agencies. No, we're talking about the bad apples that is in our police departments. But the bad thing about bad apples is bad apples have been empowered by rotten trees. Because in order for you to get some bad apples, you also have to look at the tree that is coming from. And our police departments have to make sure that we are promoting true justice for all, promoting equality, promoting really protecting and serving in our communities, promoting community policing. I don't see how you, and this is not just for police officers, I say that for teachers in the classroom. If you don't love the people, why are you in there, right? If you don't love kids, why are you in the classroom? If you don't love people, you have no business with a badge and gun. You know? And one of the most powerful weapons that an officer has is not the badge and gun, it's his mind and his mouth. If you know how to build relationships, communicate, and de-escalate, you'd be surprised how many altercations you have to get into in some occasions. Obviously, we know that there are some crazy situations where you have to address it and eliminate the threat. But for the most part, those relationships and dialogues and being able to de-escalate and being able to talk down and talk to people is a great benefit for public servants and law enforcement. Our nation is upset, Sheriff. Our communities are on fire. It's no secret. I'm sure you probably meeting with your command staff and having those talks with your deputies about what's going on nationally and the potential what could happen in your county. No county is exempt. I think that, especially when I look at TPD and some other local law enforcement that's been doing some things in the community, doing strong outreach. I feel confident for Tissonians in our city and in our communities because of the proactive relationships we have had. But make no mistake, all municipalities and all communities do not have this. It's hard to talk about law and order when you don't even have relationships with the people you're trying to bring order to. So relationships, and community policing and doing better at creating diversity in our law enforcement. I believe law enforcement agencies should reflect its community. You just can't have a whole lot of white people going into black and brown neighborhoods and you barely have anybody that looks like them. If that is the case, then we have to really be looking at our recruiting and looking at strategies on how to attract our communities of color to diversify our law enforcement agencies. We have so much going on. We also have a president. Now, I'm saying this has nothing to do with politics. I say this all the time. I'm just talking about because it's the right thing to do and it is the right thing to say. Is that when the nation is on fire, we don't need inflammatory type of rhetoric that creates divisiveness, that overlooks the pain of your people. I mean, as if it's not there. Even the news now is talking about some of his advisors is trying to get him to have dialogue about this issue. That's already offensive. You mean to tell me that your advisors have to try to get you to have a conversation about certain Americans that have been marginalized and disenfranchised in this country, about bringing calm and bringing peace and having those strong conversations about bringing people together? That's an issue, Sheriff. That is an issue. And it doesn't make our jobs easier on both sides as community leaders, as law enforcement leaders. If this was Democrat or Republican, I'd be saying the exact same thing. At some point, everything is not just blue and red. Some things is not about partisan politics. It's about being a patriot and being a faithful, loyal citizen to this country. And we look to the White House to be a beacon of light when there's darkness all over. We look for hope. And regardless of where our political stance is, you take the oath of office to serve in that office is to protect, to serve, domestic and foreign from enemies, and to bring clarity, communication, and coalitions to bring us together in unity. So we've seen time in and time out also when officers do these type of things, high levels of misconduct complaints, never investigated, never escalated up to being consequenced or reprimanded or even dismissed. Our country and our communities have seen, even if all officers may be fired, no arrests or no indictments, no convictions, just a bare few. So it's hard for us to get excited about justice because we're wondering, we're holding our breath like, okay, is it really something going to take place this time? Is change really going to take place this time? And so it's been really tough. And so, Sheriff, I want to thank you for coming. You're very brave, sir, because we have tough conversations here, sir. We don't do any fluff, okay? Well, we talk through it, we get with it. But at the end of the day, we have to come together and we have to have change. And so my guest today is the Pima County Sheriff, Mark Napier, have matriculated with experience with Tucson Police Department as a police officer, And you can correct me. I believe you moved up the ranks, supervisory lead to command staff, being a captain, retired. Also has a son, so he bleeds blue. His son is now blue in TPD. Said he has grandchildren coming on, and they're deep in his pockets. And so that's what happens when you have grandchildren. And he took the courage after retiring to run for sheriff, and got elected 4 years ago, and running for reelection. And so we're going to talk about that eventually, your reelection, and why Pima County residents should reelect you as sheriff. But let's talk about what we really have going on right now. Right now, we have so much going on. And I said a mouthful, so you can take any part of some of the stuff I've said in my introduction. But welcome, Sheriff. What's your thoughts?
Well, honestly, my friend, we don't have anything we disagree about. I don't disagree with one syllable of what you said in that intro. I don't think any conscious person could. What you're most right about is that public safety is not a partisan issue. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's not a right or a left issue. It's not a progressive or a conservative issue. It's a quality of life issue. It's a community issue. And we ought to approach it that way. But unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., everything is partisan. Everything is about politics. And that troubles me because it shouldn't enter into this at all. And you're right. There are things that we need to work on. And you expressed a concern that I have. I started as a police officer in 1981, and we've been around a while. We've heard this over and over again. We need to do something. We need to do something. And then the things pass and nothing much changes. And I do share your concern that I find that bias, prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination are wrong. They're always wrong. They're never right. And it's equally wrong when you do it against law enforcement officers. When you paint them, as you said, you're not painting the law enforcement with a broad brush and saying every cop or every law enforcement officer, because honestly, you'd be speaking about my son, and I know my son's heart, and I know that that hate doesn't reside in my son's heart. He wasn't raised that way. So we got to be careful, because I find that prejudice, bias, discrimination, stereotyping are always wrong, no matter who it's done, because we allow it about any group. We allow it about any individual. We hearken to allow it about anyone, and none of us benefit from that. But we do have to have constructive dialogue on these issues because they're important. And I don't think those discussions necessarily should be led by Washington, D.C., because they should be led at a community level, right? I mean, we are a unique community. I've lived in this valley for 33 years. This is a unique community. We're different than Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We're different than New York City or Los Angeles. So we really need these grassroots discussions here at this level. That's why I'm on your show. And you said, well, we ask tough questions. If I can't answer tough questions, if I'm afraid to be on your show, guess what? I need to find another line of work. The other thing that you didn't mention is that I have a very diverse base of experience. I was with the police department in Iowa before I came here to Tucson. Then I went up to the Phoenix Valley for a short time. Then I went to work for the University of Arizona, where I worked for 8 years as an administrator at the University of Arizona. And then people said, you should run for sheriff. And I said no about 15 times. And then people kept saying, no, you really should. And then I realized it was my calling. You and I are people of faith. And there's an adage that announcing your plans is a good way to hear God laugh at you. Right. And I believe in that. So I believe this was a calling. I'm here for a reason. I do have a very progressive education. I got my master's degree at Boston University. Boston University will never be qualified as a right-wing school. So while I am a Republican, I don't back away from that. I do have a very progressive education, so I do understand the social justice issues that we've spoken about. In fact, I've taught in the graduate school level at Boston University for 15 years. So I do understand these social strains that we're speaking about, and would like to, as your sheriff, bring positive dialogue to those things.
So you brought up something that's very important as far as running for sheriff. I still think a lot of communities, besides the county jail, they really understand what sheriff deputies are, what they're doing outside of what they see at their local police departments. Could you share why is it important to have the right elected sheriff? What do the sheriff do? What are you responsible for in the county, and what do your deputies do? And, do you have detectives and investigations, things like that? So share a little bit about what is your role and responsibility so that more people can be aware of the role.
Well, sure. And I think the most fundamental difference, Demond, is that the sheriff is elected by the people. In the state of Arizona, there are only 15 people that are elected fundamentally and primarily to maintain public safety in our community. Only 15 people, and those are your county sheriffs. And they answer directly to the people. So when a sheriff is elected by the population of the county, it's by popular vote. So you're not the Republican sheriff, you're not the Democrat sheriff, you're not the independent or the liberal sheriff or the conservative. You're the sheriff of all the people. And that's fundamentally different from somebody who's appointed by a city council or something like a chief of police. So the sheriff will always be accountable to the people. If the county does not believe that I'm doing a good job, they have a remedy: unelect me. And they should send me packing into retirement. If you believe I'm not doing a good job, that is the remedy. And I think that that's the way it should be. Now, your broader question about how sheriff's departments are different, well, they're really not different. I think the fundamental difference is that county sheriffs have responsibility for the detention facility, which generally municipalities do not have a detention facility, certainly not a long-term detention facility. So in addition to everything else I'm responsible for in the county, I'm responsible for the operation of our detention facility, and all the safety of all the people there. And with the COVID crisis, the nature of the danger to people incarcerated has fundamentally changed as well. So we've had to become public health experts over the last few months to make sure that we're taking good care of the health of the people in our detention facility.
Awesome. So thank you for sharing that for people can know. So again, this is Higher Ground with Dr. Hope. If you're listening, I can take your comments. If you have any questions for the sheriff, I can take those comments so that I can bring them to the sheriff. So type that in the comments so we can get an engaging community with our county sheriff today. So, Higher Ground is about tough. We're not scared here. This show goes in, Sheriff. We talk the real talk. So let's have those tough discussions. Do law enforcement and police agencies have a race issue?
Now, are you speaking about racial inequality, or are you speaking about the demographics of the issue?
We're talking about the fight of the struggle. We're talking about racial bias, racial discrimination, people of color being viewed in certain ways as far as racial profiling, things of that nature. So that's what I'm talking about.
We have room to improve. There's no doubt about that. To say that there isn't racial bias in society, if there isn't, to suggest that there are not socioeconomic inequalities in our country is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that is absurd. Anybody that just looks at the landscape and says to me, Mark, there is no racial inequality in our country. Mark, there is no socioeconomic inequalities in our country. I would say you must have your eyes closed, because there still are, and they're pronounced. And to suggest that in the broader society those things exist, but somehow law enforcement would be immune from those things. In other words, it permeates the rest of society, but somehow we're this fortress where these things do not occur is also silly. Do I believe that it permeates the heart of every law enforcement officer and every agency? Absolutely not. No, I don't believe that. But I do believe there is room for improvement. We need to improve our ability to recruit people of color. There are a lot of factors of why that we're not successful in doing that. And one of them we talked about on the telephone, and that is the disparate certification standards at a state level that do have a disparate impact on people of color and people from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, because there's things that you could do as a teenager that will forever disqualify you rather, from being a law enforcement officer, that have a disparate impact on people of color. This strikes very close to my heart, because my son-in-law, Francisco Ortiz, family came up from El Salvador. And Francisco had a very difficult teenage years, and he made some terrible mistakes before he became part of our family. Francisco now is going to be the father of one of my grandchildren. He is married to my youngest daughter. But because of his past, he can never, ever be a police officer, period. He can never be a police officer. Despite the fact he's currently in E6 in the United States military, he's a recruiter. He's my son-in-law. He's laid a wreath at Arlington Cemetery. There is no pathway to redemption. And that is a problem. So we're barring a lot of people from people of color and people that have come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds from becoming law enforcement. It feels blocked to them. They feel like they're not welcome. And that is a fundamental problem, because they don't feel like this is a welcoming environment to them, because some of these standards are very antiquated. But we do need to root these things out without painting the entire law enforcement community with this broad brush that I don't think is justified. I don't think that hate resides in the heart of the average police officer. I don't see that. I do not see that. I don't think that the average law enforcement officer sees a person of color in a disparate way. I don't feel that. And I base that not on whimsical or idealistic ideas, but on more than 30 years of experience in this field. So I think we have a lot of room to work. And as you pointed out, we can't do that if we don't communicate. And that means the people of color have got to be willing to come to me as well and say, we are going to sit down with you. We realize you're a Republican sheriff. There are some stereotypes there too, my friend. There are some predispositions that if I'm a Republican sheriff, I must think something, that I must have certain ideals in my head. That community's got to reach out to me and say, look, Sheriff, we have some concerns. We want to sit down with you. We want to work through these things.
Yeah, you make a great point. And I would say a lot of that remedy is relationships, right? If we have relationships, regardless of what political stance you stand for, if I know you, if we've had dialogue, if there's strong outreach on both sides of the aisle, then I can say, I can cut through all of the muck and the mire, and I can say, no, I know him for myself, because these are the things we talk about. These are the policies that he stands for. So
one step further, Demond, here's the other thing that troubles me. If we sit down, you and I, and we say we got 10 things to talk about, and we can agree about 7 things, and we disagree about 3 things, and maybe these 3 things we'll never fix. We're just going to disagree. Which things do we focus on? The 3 things we disagree about, or the 7 things that we can move forward? See, that's part of the problem in our country as a whole, my friend, is that we focus on things that make us different. We focus on things we disagree about. We focus on animosity and misunderstanding, instead of finding those 7 things that you say, you know what, I can agree with this, and we work forward to move those things forward. But we'll spend the entirety of our time sometimes, especially in the political environment, saying these 3 things we disagree about, so we can't move forward on the 7. That's a problem.
So we're talking about relationship building, I'm a big fan of 21st century policing. I believe policing need to make sense and need to be relevant. And we've had good old boys clubs type of things going on in history, and we've kept certain standards in place, certain policies in place, and have not been open to make those cultural shifts. And one of them is community policing. That's a given. From you and your office, what are you doing for greater outreach for Black Americans and Brown Americans? What type of strategies do you have in place, or things you have done to really start that conversation or building that relationship with the community of color?
Well, we do that every day. You speak about community policing as if it's a novel thing, as if it's something that's unique. It's a program, it's an initiative. If we're not doing community policing, what are we doing? There's the police in the community. We should be doing community policing in everything that we do. It shouldn't be a program or an initiative or a buzzword. It should permeate everything the agency does. If a law enforcement officer is taking a burglary report, are they doing community policing? Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. If a law enforcement officer is issuing a citation, are they doing community policing? Yes. That's how their mindset should be. We've reached out with the Criminal Justice Reform Committee here at Pima County to look at a lot of criminal justice practices. We have significantly, especially over the last few months, reduced jail population significantly. We need to look at who's in our detention facilities and why. We have criminalized being poor. Make no mistake about that. If I get arrested for some offense on the way home tonight and there's a $500 bail, it will annoy me, but I can get out of jail. For some people, they go to jail not because they pose a societal threat, but because they're poverty. We have criminalized poverty. Make no mistake about that. And I know it sounds un-Republican of me to look at bail reform, but we need to be thinking about things like that. we try to get out in every segment of our community. One thing about being a county sheriff's department is my area is 9,200 square miles. So we have a very diverse population that goes all the way from Ajo to Vail, to Marana, to South Tucson. We have a very broad area. And so we're doing that outreach all the time. But part of that has got to be a willingness of the people of color to reach out to us as well. Because, Damon, we're having a two-way conversation right now. That two-way conversation is absolutely necessary. You can't have if we go out and we're just communicating in one direction, that's not going to fix anything. The other thing we're doing that I'm really proud of, we talked about this on the phone.
What do you mean by in one direction?
Well, is law enforcement just coming out and being a talking head without the receptivity of the communities to communicate back? Communication's got to be a two-way street.
I know. So I'm asking you as the leader, because we elected you.
Right.
I'm asking you, leader, what are your strategies on building stronger relations with the Black and Brown community? And if you have, I would like to know a list of things that you have done. I get the understanding of the philosophy of communication. It takes dialogue. It takes both ends on the aisle. But I also believe when we are in leadership, we are held to a higher standard. And one of those things is outreaching to community. And I'm not saying just reach out to the Black and Brown community only. That's nonsense if you think that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is because of our disparities, because of the inequalities that takes place, that's a problem. And so I guess what I'm trying to see is what are the steps that you and your sheriff department are doing to build those relationships, because it has to happen. And so I want to know what are your stance on it?
I'll give you a good example. If I were not a police officer, I would have been a teacher. I ended up being both. So life's funny that way. But one of the things we did, because we know that if we're going to recruit people of color and people from disadvantaged backgrounds, we've got to go down to the high school level, to the junior high school level to recruit them up. So we've partnered with JTED program, especially at Sunnyside High School, because I spent a lot of my time in my career with Tucson Police on the South Side, and I have a great affection for the South Side of our community. So we've gone down to the high school and we said, look, here's the deal. We're going to provide some instructors. We're going to provide a curriculum so that people going through their high school education can take a couple of elective courses. When they show my department that they've taken these elective courses, we're going to fast track them into a career in corrections. Now, a current corrections officer after probation makes $21.50 an hour with full benefits. That's a good job in the city of Tucson. It is. That's competitive pay. Then if somebody who's 18 years old after high school continues to give us good service till they're 21, which is the first chance they would have to become a deputy, we're also going to remove all the barriers that we can to fast track that person into being a deputy sheriff. But we've got to go down to the high school level to start recruiting these people, getting them interested in a career in law enforcement, because by the time they're 25 or in their 20s, they've already kind of made a life path. And some of these people have struggled to try to find their life path. So that's just one example of a thing that we're doing that's community outreach that's warm to my heart, because it's about education, which is what the rest of my life has been about outside of law enforcement. So things like that are a perfect example of that outreach that we've done since I become sheriff. We're also looking at justice reform all the time, about working with the MacArthur Foundation to look at who's in jail and why, and how there is a disparate impact to people of color in the criminal justice system. So we're doing that all the time. It's not something, it shouldn't be a novel program. It should be something that permeates what we do every day.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, like I said, we're going to have tough discussions, and I will address when we're not having enough of the agencies look like the community. Far as African Americans as deputies in your agencies, far as African Americans and Latino Americans and women in your command staff. What does that look like? Do you have any captains or chiefs or lieutenants that looks like me in your agency?
Demond, I became sheriff 3.5 years ago. I inherited the pool of people that were eligible to be promoted when I came here.
Right.
So this is a systemic problem. So we need to be cultivating that. That's why you have to start at the beginning. You've got to start planting the seeds. And for
I need a straight answer. Do you have anybody that looks like me in your command staff?
yes,
Okay.
yes, we have an African American lieutenant and several Hispanic commanders. So, right, will I say that my department, and let me be clear about this, my department is 2 white and 2 male. There's absolutely no mistaking about that.
Okay.
I don't back away from that.
Okay.
But that department has been.
Sheriff, now you're talking my talk. That's what I want you to walk into. That's why I want to have this conversation. Again, these brave conversations. Some people don't even want to touch it. I think we have to talk about it.
If you're afraid to have a tough discussion, you need to go home and watch soap operas. You ain't got no business being an elected official. You most certainly don't have any business being a law enforcement leader if you're not willing to have tough discussions. You and I might disagree. What's the worst that happens? We each hurt each other. I mean, you're not going to beat me up, and I ain't going to beat you up. Nothing like that's going to happen. So there's no reason to be afraid of this. The department, law enforcement, if you look at the broader law enforcement community, it's 2 white and it's 2 male. No mistake about that. No mistake.
But why is that? Why is that?
Because
it's generational. It's not like it just happened here or there. It's generational. Like, we've never had, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever had a black elected sheriff in any 15 counties in Arizona.
No, I think you're probably right. And, at least as far back as I can remember, you're right, that we haven't.
Right. It's been older white males with 30, 40 years of law enforcement experience. And it's kind of like being that trend over and over and over again. And as you have alluded to with PIMA County, which the sheriff office you're responsible for, that is older white males over and over and over. Why do you think that is? And what do we need to do to change that culture? It's culture.
Culture does not change overnight. Okay. And it's got to also be the other side of that culture is people of color have got to decide that they want to pursue a career in law enforcement, that is attractive. And a lot of the rhetoric that, well, all law enforcement officers are racist. And I know you're not saying that, my friend, but there is that rhetoric out there. So if I'm a young person of color and I just got a bachelor's degree at the University of Arizona and I'm thinking about my life path, do I think about going into law enforcement? No, I'm not thinking about that. And we're having trouble recruiting any millennials, much less millennials of color. It is a significant problem because millennials as a group, as a generational group, and that's our recruiting pool, don't see a career in law enforcement as particularly attractive. I'm a baby boomer, so I saw life very differently than certainly my children do who are millennials. So it's hard to track millennials in general, and then equally hard or more compoundingly hard to attract millennials of color into law enforcement. And then I think the other compounding factor, aggravating factor, is that the current standards to become a law enforcement officer have a disparate impact on people of color and people that are from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background. We need to change that.
And because of what? You hit something which I know is a fact myself. Why is that?
Because these standards were made in the 70s. They haven't been updated at all. And there's a misconception out there that somehow, and this is going to make some folks mad, so get ready, brace yourself. But if there's this perception out there that if you're a white male and you get a 4-year degree in ancient Sanskrit at the University of Arizona, and you have absolutely no life experience, you've not gotten a ticket, you've never been in a fight, you never did anything wrong, and you apply to be a law enforcement officer, that somehow has predictive value of you being a better law enforcement officer. I disagree. Those people, in my humble opinion, don't make good law enforcement officers because they have no life experience. They feel fear when they see a person of color because they've never interacted with a person of color. I was in the United States military. I was a farm boy in Iowa. When I popped into basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I saw people that weren't like me. They didn't speak like me. They didn't act like me. They didn't have the same values as me. And that experience rounded me out. But young people today that aren't playing sports, they're in their isolated Anglo environment. They get a college degree because mom and dad could pay for it. And then they decide, well, ancient Sanskrit doesn't pay very good. I'll try being a cop for a while. we have in their profession some idea that somehow those people make better cops. I would take the knockaround kid that grew up on the South Side who maybe made some mistakes, like my son-in-law. My son-in-law, I'm not speaking out of turn here. I'm speaking about somebody I love. My son-in-law, who can't be a cop, and he would make an awesome cop. Fluent in Spanish, and he has life experience. He's grown up as a person of color, and he gets it. He knows what it's like to struggle and to do those things that other people might not be able to identify with.
Yeah, so yeah, this gets deep because I know for a fact that there are certain rules in place that automatically eliminates people of color because of their backgrounds and social, economical backgrounds, poor communities, urban communities, at risk black and brown youth, right? Maybe made some bad choices, but where's the restorative justice in that? Where is the opportunity for people to redeem themselves? Heck, let's not be hypocrites. I bet you people that sit on that panel that's making all these decisions have had their hands in cookie jars too that just haven't got caught. Everybody made some kind of mistake or some bad choice. And I don't think that your history should be your destiny. I think that your history should be a learning curve, learn what not to do, and then educate and mentor other people not to do it. But let people get back and give back to their communities. There's too many African Americans and Latinos and Native Americans that get excluded in this process, and it makes it really hard for people of color to become law enforcement because we also have these policies, okay? And I think that that's when I'm talking about re-examining, reviewing policies that doesn't make any freaking sense. It's even making it harder for law enforcement officers to even get recruits, period, on top of getting recruits of color because of some of the post mandates, that certifies police officers in Arizona.
Well, you and I are persons of faith. We believe in redemption, right? That you can sin and ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. But in Arizona Post world, there ain't no forgiveness on certain things. Now, obviously, if you are an axe murderer from Ohio, you probably shouldn't be a police officer, right? But if you make some mistakes at 17, and I'll use my son-in-law as an example because it pulls at my heart. He made some mistakes in his teenage years. He has now got 5 or 6 years of stellar performance. And he's in the military. He's literally the poster child for United States military. He's a recruiter. And he's my son-in-law as the sheriff of the county. He's going to be the father of my grandchild. And there is no pathway for redemption. No pathway. And that's wrong, man. It's just wrong. And then people of color say, well, I can't pass the background check. And furthermore, this is a profession that doesn't want me. This is a profession that doesn't look like me. Well, we've got to break that down someplace. I actually talked to Governor Ducey about this very thing on the telephone a week ago. And he asked me what was going on. I said, Governor, we got to fix these things. What he asked me about wasn't it true, Sheriff, that you somehow could waive these things? In other words, hire people anyway. And I said, well, the problem with that is agency heads are going to be reticent to do that because then all the liability goes back on their community should that person act out. We've got to have Arizona Post say it's okay. And that Arizona Post says, okay, in your background, you could have done this series of things. But if there's enough time separated, maybe you went in the military, maybe you did some other things, there's enough time between the bad thing that you did and now there's a way to give you a chance. Here's one of the things that I'd like Arizona Post to consider. Let sheriffs who operate detention facilities say to a person of color that otherwise would be ineligible to be a law enforcement officer, say, look, Fred, you come to work for me for 3 years. You give me stellar performance as a correctional officer. Then we are allowed by Arizona Post to sign a waiver. And that forgives what you did, and you can become a law enforcement officer. So there's a pathway to redemption. There has to be something like that, Damon. Otherwise,
so if sheriffs do waivers for people that may have made some bad choices, but you can tell that they have groomed, they have grown, they have gotten education, they have done some amazing things in their community, and we can say, look, based on, yeah, you made some bad choices or whatever, but you kept your nose clean, period. I mean, rather if they did it in a correction facility, but may have served in other capacities, improved themselves, redeemable, is there a path where you, as the sheriff, can write this waiver and move forward and allow them a chance to become a law enforcement agent
We
or
need
officer?
we need this authorization at the state level, Demond, to do that, because
Okay.
otherwise all the liability falls on that agency. So what we need is Arizona Post to revise its rules so that that path is very clear and it's sanctioned by the state, because the sheriff does not certify law enforcement officers in this state. Arizona Post does. So that's where the onus should be, and that's where the responsibility should lie.
Okay. So see, I got some comments coming in. Tiffany Smith said that you're acknowledging the social economic disparities that we have as far as recruiting, but as the sheriff, what can you do to change that effect under your authority?
It's hard. We need elected officials at a much higher level than me to address these things, and not with window dressing. We put the same people in Washington, D.C., some of them for 30, 40 years, and we have the same problems. We keep reelecting them. That's the problem, is who we're sending to Washington, D.C. As a sheriff, can I affect the economy of Pima County? Not to any great degree. I can't affect those things. Can I affect the disparities in our education system? Do you believe that a person in Sunnyside High School gets the same educational opportunity as somebody in Catalina Foothills?
Yeah.
No, no, it doesn't happen. But can I affect that as sheriff? Other than speak out about it, my ability to do to make those changes is very limited. But at least I can use somewhat of the bully pulpit I have as the sheriff to advance some of these ideas, which I
Right.
try to do, and it makes people on the right and the left mad at me. I told my wife, I said, the good thing about being a guy in the center is you get matching black eyes, both on the right and the left. So you're always balanced, because somebody's always angry at you.
Right. So we had talked about briefly, even if people didn't want to serve as a police officer, but different opportunities and way to serve the sheriff's office. So I know that you rolled out, I don't know, 6 months ago, several months ago, your advisory council to the sheriff's office, and we had an interesting conversation. I was really shocked that we discussed that you didn't have any African Americans on the advisory council. I find that very concerning. Because my question is, one of the things to create systemic change is we need to be having seats at the table. And I think that looks like, if you're not a sworn officer, serving on councils, advisory committees, advisory boards. And so I was really shocked at that. And I want to know, like, what are your plans to change that, to make sure that we have people of color representing our communities on your advisory board? Because in my opinion, if I'm just thinking that I was in your shoes, or I am in leadership capacities, and so I'm always at work trying to find ways how to be diverse in everything we do. And one thing that I'm always pushing, how can we be more diverse? And if I saw that we lacked that, I would push back and say, no, you got to go back and search out again. This doesn't reflect the community. I'm sorry, I can't rock with this. This doesn't need the optics. It doesn't even look right. So what are your plans on your advisory council to get more people of color to represent on your board?
Well, when I open up the table, you say seat at the table. When I say here's the table, here's chairs, please come and sit at the table, and I hear crickets from the people of color in the African American community. Part of
When did you ask us to do that? I don't remember getting no.
we put it out as much as we could. We blasted it out on social media. We did everything that we could to make it known that we were doing this. And I'm a member of the NAACP Tucson chapter. I attend a lot of these events, and I need people from color to, when we have these opportunities, they've got to say, there's a seat at the table. I want to see.
Anybody, though.
We blasted it out as much as I could, my friend. I mean, I don't know what else we could have done to make it.
Well, let me give you a suggestion. What you could have done is you could have came to me, president of the IMA. The organization oversees 30 African American churches. You could have came to me on the board president for Tucson Urban League, which is a civil rights organization. And other people, not just me, Doris Snowden, Pastor Lewis, Pastor Grady Scott, of having those conversations and saying, hey, I'm looking to putting this board together. I'm afraid that tradition, what happens is We don't get a lot of representation of people of color in the community to represent on my board. So can you talk to your congregation? Can you talk to your constituents and colleagues to make sure we get some good names that's going to be diverse, that's open-minded, that can create a think tank to help us with these reforms and these changes to send on my board? I think that's what I appreciate what you're saying, sending out emails and social media and letters out. But again, I'm talking about the importance of relationships again, because that would get us so far in a lot of these efforts that we're trying to do. I think that should have been a better approach, talking to people that you say you have relationships with, not the community of color.
Agree.
So you don't have any blacks on there, so I want some changes on that, Sheriff.
Blast it out to your community. The problem, the other problem that we have, Demond, is that people express interest and then they never show up at the meetings. Now, we've been down because of COVID. So we're having a problem having the meetings, because these are not meetings when you have 10 or 15 people that are good for Zoom meetings. That's just an unwieldy amount. But as we loosen up from COVID, we're going to be redoing this, and we need to have, it's not enough that you say you want to participate, which some people have, but then they don't. So we're always looking for more people on this, and the diversity of that group of people is important, because the last thing that you want to hear is people that think like you, right? I already have one me, don't need another one. I'm not interested in having people that think like me, look like me, and act like me. That's not interesting to me. That's why you and I might disagree about some things, but I enjoy hearing your perspective, because I don't think I woke up this morning knowing everything. So you need to be able to hear people that think differently than you. So as we get past this COVID thing where we can have the meetings again in a safe environment, we're always looking for people that want to be a part of that. And we thought we did as good a job as we could in broadcasting that out. But there is a little bit of predisposition sometimes of people of color of saying, yeah, they say they want us on there, but it's not true. It's not real.
Yeah, and that's possible. Again, it goes back to relationships with those the demographics in those communities, and speaking to the leaders that have influence, that can advocate. That let's give the sheriff a chance. That conversation did not happen with people like me. To make sure that we have African Americans on your board to advocate for the things that we're trying to do, having a seat at the table. And I think that, and that's fine to a degree. I think the point is, once we know what we know, we have to do better. So my question or my thought is, now that we know what we know, we don't have any African Americans on there, and we can get some African Americans on that board. We're not just going to just keep going left or just keep going right or keep going straight. We need to say, okay, let's do another outreach and a search for diversity on this board. This is unacceptable. I'm not going to just allow that to be. I'm going to go to the next step to see what we can do to make sure that my board reflect the community that is served.
Well, and in fairness to us, Damon, we've had 2 meetings. We didn't know, because we didn't collect demographic information when people put in. So until we had the first meeting, we didn't know who would show up. I mean, we selected names. We tried to do it by supervisor district. I tried to get 2 representatives from each supervisor district to show that because we have a large geographic area we're responsible for as well.
How about the board of supervisors?
No, what I'm saying though is when we knew which supervisory district the person lived in, so we tried to get people from different parts of the county geographically. So we were trying to do that so that each supervisor district was represented. But we do need more diversity on that. But it just kind of started, and then we had COVID, and it's been pushed on pause.
So did you meet with the board before you rolled it out?
Did I meet with the board? I certainly
informed your advisory board.
Did I meet with the board of supervisors before the advisory board?
No, your advisory board, that the members that came to make your advisory board.
We've met twice.
Did you meet with them?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you would see that there was nobody looking like me.
That's right.
Okay, so those are the things I'm talking about. Is when we see that, we just don't continue the same momentum. We're like, wait a minute, like where's Where's the Native Americans? Where's the Latinos? Where's the African Americans? No, no. I need you to go back and do another outreach and another uh, uh, search to get more people on this board. Like, I can't rock with this. I mean, I'm just saying, like, no, this doesn't reflect the community. I would be like, no, like if people saw this would be crazy. So no, hinders our relationship building. So what happens, like with the statement you just said, is people are like, oh, they really don't want me. Well, if people find out that there's no African Americans and strong people of color on your board, that's going to empower the conversation. What reverses that is they maybe have had a preconceived thought that you felt that way, but when they look at the policies and when they look at how you implement and see that, wait a minute, it's diverse, it has African Americans, it have people of color on those boards, they're going to step back and say, I think we need to give the sheriff another chance. And so these are the things that helps empowers some of those thought processes, and we need to reverse that by making sure that we have the right people on those boards.
I agree.
Okay.
I open the door, but once the door is open, people have a responsibility to go through it. Could we agree
with that?
Okay.
I agree with that.
Amen.
But come to us, talk to us, to let us know what you need, so we can make sure that, because I'm about reform, I'm not about beating nobody up, and I don't want you to feel that way, Sheriff. I just have these tough conversations because it's needed. The conversations I had, rather in your face or behind your back anyway. So I'd rather we just go ahead and have these brave conversations, bring you on, people can see where your heart is at. And even when we bump our heads, guess what? We can say, ouch, that hurt. Let's not try to do that again, right? And so this is the opportunity where we can be being a leading model for other communities nationwide when we're doing some of these great things.
You and I agree about so much more than we disagree about, and that's a good.
That's good. And my feelings would be hurt if we had a disagreement.
But then we choose what we focus on. That's what the problem in this country is that we choose to focus on what's different. We choose to focus on what's angry. We choose to focus on what we disagree about instead of looking for those areas of common ground. And we can make so much progress if we look for areas of common ground, common concern, because it's human beings. You have an advanced education as I do. Yeah. Human beings as creatures are vastly more similar than they are dissimilar. And that's fact. So we share the same things, love of family and want for food and nutrition and the basic needs of Maslow's hierarchy. We all have those things. We all, you know what I was struck by one time, my undergraduate degree is in social psychology, and I was struck by something that occurred to me one time. You know what sounds the same in every language and every culture? Laughter and crying. Yeah. They're universal, man. They are. If you listen to people cry in Africa or in Asia, it sounds the same. Laughter, smiles, they're human qualities. I mean, these basic human qualities, we're so much more similar than we are dissimilar, but we spend all of our time and energy trying to find out where we're different, where we disagree, where we have anger and animosity, instead of saying, look, you may look differently than I do, but we have some common ground here. Let's try to fix something. Because after this is gone, guess what? I still live here. This is my home, man. Pima County is my home. I intend to live the rest of my life in this county. My kids live here. My grandchildren live here. So long after this is not part of my life anymore, I still care about this community. That's the only reason. The only reason on God's earth that I became sheriff of this county is because I care about this community, because I had a job at the University of Arizona that I loved. I love my job at the university. I am a round peg in a round hole at a university. I fit, man. I fit really well in that environment. I had a great job with no stress in my life. I made more money than I make as a sheriff. And people came to me and said, hey, you should do this. Right. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to close out my career life, this is how I want to close out my career life.
Awesome. So I only have a few more minutes. So I want to get some more things out. And again, this is High Ground with Dr. Ho. We're talking about racial inequalities and criminal justice reform on our show. This is part 2, and we have Sheriff Mark Napier, Pima County Sheriff. Also, when it comes to the jail population, we realize that, and you can correct me wrong, where your data may show a little different, but I know for a while we were looking at African Americans 4% in the Pima County demographics, but we were representing from 10 to 12% in the county jail. What are we doing to reverse that? Why are we having more Black people overly representing in your county jail than the population?
Well, as you know, Demond, it's not my county jail. It's the penitentiary system across the country, right?
Yeah, that's
So
true.
that is a problem much bigger than Pima County, Arizona, and we need to have thoughtful discussions about why that is. The misconception is that the sheriff puts people in jail and the sheriff lets people out of jail. I do neither of those two things. So the system puts people in jail. The system keeps people in jail. So the sheriff doesn't have a lot of input into that, plus other than what we're doing with the criminal justice reform through the MacArthur Foundation, which I'm actively involved with.
They're familiar with that.
We need absolutely is bail reform in this country. We need bail reform because, as I spoke earlier, we have made being poor a crime, and that's a problem. And we need bail reform, and it needs to be. If I can't post a $500 bail, but I could, and we're both an equal threat to the community. The only reason for somebody to be incarcerated is because they present a threat to the community, right?
Yes.
That's the reason to incarcerate people, but that isn't the reason that everybody that's in there is incarcerated. But that's a decision made by the criminal justice system beyond the sheriff. That's the judges,
So you
prosecutors.
have no say as a sheriff, far as policies or reforming where it makes sense. Obviously, someone's a threat to society. Yeah, you need to have your tail in that jail. But if you make some bad choices and there's some opportunities for a fresh start, what does that look like? Partnering with the sheriff, and obviously everything's not on you because also you have Barbara Wall's office with the prosecutions, from prosecutors, the county attorney, and obviously you do have your judges as well from the bench. But is there something where we can get a little bit comprehensive on that approach?
Well, yeah, and it goes be above that, Demond. It goes all the way to the legislature. I mean, we have three branches of government: a branch that enforces law, one that interprets law, and one that makes law. So we got to talk to the people who are making law, right? Don't ask sheriff to ignore the law. Don't ask the county attorney to ignore the law because they didn't create the law. They're in the executive branch. So we've got to look at this in a broader sense based on the structure of our government. The founding documents had three branches of government that are co-equal, but they have very different responsibilities. So it goes beyond just the local level to look at what laws have disparate impact on people of color and people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yeah.
So it's a broader discussion. And I would go back to my statement a little while ago. We're putting the wrong people in Washington, D.C. And when you know what, we complain about the stuff that comes out of Washington, D.C., and we keep electing the same people over and over and over again. And that's right and left. It's Democrat and Republican. The wrong people are in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. does not represent any more than my department does the racial makeup or the demographic makeup of this country. We have a lot of people in Washington, D.C. that are millionaires. They're millionaires. They don't have any idea what it means to struggle, to pay your bills, to do those things. We're not representative, and we keep electing, in my opinion, the wrong people.
So, to my next point, also we talk about inequality. Obviously, I'm not just talking about African Americans disparities, but also my Latino brothers and sisters in immigration. What is your stand in regards to your immigration policies, far as the struggles that we see in the Latino community?
Very clear. First of all, my department will never be, underline never, in capital letters, a 287G department. 287G is a federal regulation that allows for cross certification of deputy sheriffs as immigration officers. We will never, ever, as long as I'm the sheriff, have the authority to enforce federal immigration law. It's not our job. There are 4,000 Border Patrol agents in the Pima County, in the Tucson sector. I have 500 sworn people. We don't have the resources, nor the inclination, nor the desire to engage in federal immigration enforcement. Period. We don't have the authority.
I didn't even know that certification exists. So, how do I put it? A post-certified peace officer in Arizona can get an additional federal certification to become an immigration officer.
Absolutely. And there's another one, which is a subset of that, which is called a warrant service officer, which allows a law enforcement officer in the state to serve ICE detainer warrants. We will never be a warrant service officer program
Wow.
agency either, period.
You know, the word never is a big word, Chef.
Well, you just heard me say it. It's now public record, right? Let
Yep.
me say it again so there's no lack of clarity. We will
Okay.
never, under my administration as a sheriff, be a 287G department, which would allow my deputies to proactively enforce federal immigration law. Never. Underline never. We will never be a warrant service department either, which would allow my deputies to enforce ICE detainers. In other words, to make those like other criminal warrants. No interest in doing that. It's not our job, period. Now, does that mean that we do not cooperate with federal authorities at all? No, of course not, because human trafficking is a humanitarian issue, Damon. Migrants coming up from the South are being victimized criminally, sexually, and financially, and they're dying. They are dying in the deserts of Pima County. That is a public safety issue for the sheriff to be involved in. Make no mistake about that. I need to collaborate with my federal partners, but that means we stay in our respective lanes. My lane is public safety in Pima County. Their lane is federal immigration enforcement. The two might go down the lanes together, but I'm not going to adopt their responsibility, nor would I expect a Border Patrol agent to take a burglary report in the Catalina foothills, right? It's not their job.
Okay.
So I want to be crystal clear on that. The other thing is I have spoken passionately as a Christian and humanitarian about the humanitarian plight of migrants coming up from across our border. Here's the thing I'm intolerant about with respect to Republicans is this idea that somehow these are subhuman. Somehow these are not people like us. If you or I woke up this morning in Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, we might make the very same decision that for the sake of my family, for my safety, I have to go north. And you might enter this country without proper documentation. This is a humanitarian issue, and we need to look at it in that vein. And I have championed that in Washington, D.C., at a state level, at a national level, until I'm blue in the face. And I've testified before Congress to that very issue of the humanitarian plight of people coming up. Now, should they come here with proper documentation and legally? Yes. Should that system make more sense? Yes. But we have a humanitarian crisis on our southern border.
Yeah. And so, yeah, thank you for that. Um, what do you think about your reserve unit? I know in different police departments, they have a reserve unit for individuals who wants to become a guardian in their community, perhaps become a police officer, but already have an established career, making great money, don't need to be a full-time deputy, don't need the salary, but yet still want to have a role in law enforcement, become a police officer, and actually serve in their community that they serve. Do you think that's still an opportunity under your administration to bring back the reserve unit? Plus, it gives you more boots on the ground in case, you may be low that night and be able to call a few reserve to come in and help out. What do you think about that? Because I thought that can also be an opportunity for diversity as well. You have some people of color may say, hey, I'm doing well as a doctor, I'm doing well as a dentist and an engineer, but I would like to get involved in law enforcement, but I don't have the time to do 40 hours a week, but I can get a few days out of the month to serve. What do you think about an opportunity like that?
Well, I think it's a great idea. There are a couple things. One is in our strategic plan, which we do have a strategic plan now. So, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? We actually have a strategic plan now, and that's part of our strategic plan. But a lot of our focus, honestly, Demond, has been in basic recruiting for full-time people because we have, like every law enforcement agency in this country, have struggled. We will be at full staffing in corrections and the field probably within the next couple of months. Because our recruiting efforts are much better than they have been.
How many deputies you have on the streets?
Well, that varies in location and time of day.
It's an estimate. Like, what do you think, as far as all your shifts? How many deputies you have on the street patrolling?
Well, again, it would depend if we were talking about the foothills or Rincon or Santa Vera. where it's easier if you're in a municipality. I mean, we only sometimes will have 2 or 3 out in Ajo, for example, where you might have 10 or 12 in the Foothills district. You might have a similar number in Santa Vera. So we have roughly 420 deputies on the department. And so those are spread out between investigations and other assignments and field assignments and traffic and so forth. But we will be, with this next recruiting class, at or very near 100% staffing, which has been a struggle. If you simply Google hiring challenges for law enforcement, you'll see dozens and dozens and dozens of articles come up. It's not unique to this county. It's the problem that millennials don't see this as a career path. And until recently, you know, the unemployment rate was 3.5%. So everybody was struggling trying to find employees, not just law enforcement. It was a national problem.
What's your thought on the reserve unit, though?
Well, we need to pursue that, but honestly, my focus has been with primary deputies of recent, because that's where we are really struggling with recruiting. But we have our SAVs, our Sheriff's Auxiliary Volunteers, both in Tucson and Green Valley, and that does provide an opportunity for people who want to volunteer. And those people go out and do things that maybe we don't need a deputy to do because there's not an enforcement aspect to it. But for example, when Mount Lemon closes, we need people to stay at the base of the mountain to turn people back, or we have a very serious traffic accident. We need people to direct traffic and things like that, that really, really help us out a lot. And the Sheriff's Auxiliary Volunteers, our SAVs, are absolutely invaluable to us. And we have a very robust array of those folks.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that program. I just thought that if you had more peace officers that can give back to their communities and give you more boots on the ground, even though you're looking for regular deputies, you kind of like kill 3 birds with 1 stone. So
I agree. It's part of our strategic plan, and it's certainly on our radar screen as something that we want to do moving forward. So I'm with you on that.
Okay, I might come to be a reserve deputy. So yeah, y'all in trouble. Y'all in trouble.
Demand on patrol. I don't know about that.
I can see people now. Hey, I know you.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I want to close out on your candidacy. Give you a chance to talk about why you're running for re-election. And so you're the current sheriff. You're running for re-election. So why should Pima County residents re-elect Sheriff Mark Napier?
Well, that's a good lead-in question there. I think the department's moving in the right direction. We are committed to better fiscal management. We've done a great job with that. Our recruiting efforts are better than they have been. We are doing a lot that's very good. We've right-sized our command staff. We're appropriately spending RICO funds, which has been a problem in the past. Our promotional processes, our internal affairs processes have all been revised to be more responsive to the needs of the agency and the needs of the community. Crime is down in Pima County. Our staffing levels are coming up. We're going to finish this budget year probably about $1 million under budget, because the one thing that I bring to my job that I don't think a lot of public servants do, or public sector people, is I see this as I'm a CEO of a big business. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is a large business. We employ 1,500 people. We have a budget of $160 million. We have a service area of 9,200 square miles. So I need to look at it from a business standpoint as well. And I do approach it from that direction. We finished the last 2 budget years $11.2 million in the black, because I don't think we're spending monopoly money. We're spending your tax dollars. And I think that's important, that we spend them in a responsible way. We've given more than $5 million of compensation increases to our deputies and our corrections officers over the last couple of years. We're now marketplace competitive. We brought up starting pay so that we can now recruit the best and the brightest, which we've not been able to do in the past. I think I'm a very balanced law enforcement leader. I am a Republican, and I know that puts some people off, but I have an exceptionally progressive education. And I've been a public servant my entire life. I started in 1981 as a law enforcement officer in Iowa, served with the Tucson Police Department, the Glendale Police Department, and then went to work for the University of Arizona, which allowed me to see a whole different side of the world. So I have a very diverse base of experience. I have a master's degree from Boston University. I've given us a national platform. I'm the elected vice president of the Arizona Sheriff's Association, the elected vice president of the Major County Sheriffs of America. I serve on a lot of state and national boards to make sure that Pima County's voice is heard. I was on a conference call with the White House yesterday in my role as Vice President of Major County Sheriffs to help guide some of the policy coming out of Washington, D.C. to make sure that our voice is heard. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I don't want us to be on the menu. I want our voice to be heard, and I am your elected voice of public safety. That's what a sheriff should be. And it's not just for Republicans, it's not just for Democrats, but for all people in this county. And this is my home, man. I love this place. It's where my kids live, it's where my grandkids live. I care about what happens here. And I'm honored to be the sheriff. This is the end of my career life. I kind of feel like the Saving Private Ryan guy, you know, when they're on that hill and they are going to have that mutiny, and Tom Hanks says, I don't know the first thing about Private Ryan, but I feel like if I can do this one last good thing, I deserve the right to go home. And I look at this job as my one last chance to do a good thing before I retire.
Well, awesome. Thank you for all of what we talked about. Do you think in the future that Pima County can elect its first black or brown sheriff?
It should. It should, but that means that somebody's got to present themselves as a candidate. Somebody's got to go through the decades it takes to make you qualified to run a large law enforcement agency. And that's got to start now for somebody that will be sitting here giving an interview 20 years from now. We've got to start that process. We've got to start getting people of color to see this as an attractive career field. We got to. And that's partially on your community too, Damon, is you talking to young African-American people and saying, you should be a law enforcement officer. You should pursue this career life, because that's what's going to take all of us doing that. And there is some responsibility on the part of the African-American community to reach out to its young people and encourage that path. And we need your voice on that as a positive mentor to that community of saying, no, young man, don't get involved in these bad things over here. Instead, path yourself. Go to Pima Community College and take some criminal justice courses. Get yourself physically fit. Do some ride-alongs with the local law enforcement agency. See if you're a good fit for that, and then apply. Because it's going to take all of us. It's a community thing.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Sheriff. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, my friend.
I appreciate you for hanging in there.
Love to do it.
Interesting, right? And people want to hear the truth. They want transparency. They want these tough conversations out in the forefront, and seeing people that can come together and talk about these things. We're about to let you go. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Just remember, folks, that we have a wonderful community, and we're going through a challenging time between COVID-19 and the civil unrest. But don't forget, this is our home. And we all love Pima County. We all love the city of Tucson. This is a place that we should be proud to call home, and that people like Damon and I can have spirited discussions. And that speaks well of our home. And we should always embrace that and hold dear in our hearts the love for our community. And if we do that, a lot of these things will take care of themselves.
Well, awesome. Yeah, we've had today on Higher Ground, Dr. Hope, believe it or not, we had Sheriff Mark Napier, Pima County Sheriff for Pima County and Arizonian residents. Again, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
And Godspeed. Stay safe out there. It's our prayer that our law enforcement community stay safe and everybody goes home at the end of their shift. So they don't know me, but give them our regards. From all the way from Dr. O from Higher Ground. Take care, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you.